people need the opportunity to be good at something. So then you might ask yourself, well, what's the best antidote to the discomfort of life? And you might say, well, it's comfort. And I suppose that's what you act out when you swaddle a baby. But a better antidote is something like adventure to excellence. And that's far better antidote to suffering than the mere absence of suffering. So, not to say that the mere absence of suffering, that's not nothing, you know.
Stepping out of that sedation from comfort's difficult, though, especially if you've become routinized to it.
Yeah, well, that's the difficulty of maturity. You know, the Freudians said very wisely that the good mother necessarily fails.
What's that mean?
It means she stops providing the comfort that insulates people against the need for adventure.
I heard you say recently that a mother's ability to let her child go out into the world, knowing that they're still vulnerable and that it's now down to them and the world to look after them, that's one of the bravest things that they can do.
It's the female crucifixion. And that's exemplified best in, well, the best portrayal of that I've seen is Michelangelo's Pieta. You know, it's a statue of Mary, and she has Christ's body on her, as an adult, on her lap, and he's broken and destroyed, and, you know, she's displaying that. And that's the bravery of a mother, to allow that to happen. But not only that, to facilitate it. So
what about...
Way you go, kid. Way you go. Well, why? It's dangerous out there. It's like, yeah, no kidding. It's more dangerous here if you stay with me. By a lot. So you might lose your body out there in the world, but if you stay here, you lose your soul.
There's a classic representation of the feminine in the West, and the classic representation is Mary. And here's one of the representations. It's lovely, and it's derived, at least in part, from the story of Mary and the snake in the Garden of Eden. And so Mary has her foot on a serpent, and she's holding Christ off to the side, like this. Well, that's exactly what mothers have always done. It's a biological portrait of human women, is they hold their infants out of the reach of the terrible serpentine predator. Obviously, that's what we do. Well, that's fine, but adults aren't infants, and neither are children. And if you treat them like they are, you undermine them. You pathologize them. You turn them into old infants. That's an ugly thing, and that's the Freudian nightmare. You know, and this happens in therapy very frequently. I mean, you can be tangled into a terrible relationship with your father. That's often either because he was absent, abusive, or tyrannical, something like that. But the standard pathology with mom is she did everything for you. Well, what's left for you to do? Nothing, including never leaving. Right. And that's the motivation, you know, for the woman who's nothing but protective mother. There's no role outside of nurturant of nurturer of infants. Well, you just keep them infants. They'll never leave. They might kill you one night in your sleep, but they'll never leave. It's so comical watching the feminists, postmodernists in particular, rattle on about the absence of gender reality and act out the archetypal devouring mother at exactly the same time. For them, the world is divided into predators and infants. And the predators are evil and need to be stopped, and the infants need to be cared for. Well, that's what the mother does. But adults are not infants. And all you do is destroy them when you treat them that way, especially when they're adolescents and just starting to develop. You know, there's a rule that I attempted to abide by when I had small children, and the rule was, don't do anything for your children that they can do themselves. And that's annoying, that rule, because it takes you like 15 seconds to dress a 2-year-old, but if you let the 2-year-old dress himself, it's 15 minutes. or 20 minutes, or half an hour. You chase them around the house. But if you let them learn to dress themselves, then you don't have to dress them anymore, and they can do it. And you do that with setting the table, and you do that with everything. It's like, no, it's okay, you do that now. Well, I care for you so much, let me do that for you. It's like, I don't care for you at all when I say that. I don't care for you at all. I'm going to stop doing everything I possibly can for you as rapidly as I possibly can. Say, well, that's great. That's how you work in an old age home. Do not do anything for the inhabitants that they can do themselves, because you rob them of the last vestiges of their independence, right? It's what you do when you're a manager. If you're a good manager, you make yourself superfluous by extending autonomy and independence to the people that you manage so that they can take over the whole job. You don't do that by doing everything for people. And you certainly don't do that by dividing the world archetypally and uncritically into predators, those who have more, and victims, infants, those who have nothing, and acting like all you can ever do is protect them. You don't protect, first of all, you can't protect people. You can only make them strong. That's it. You cannot protect them. You can make them strong, and then they can protect themselves.
A woman is extremely bonded with her infant, say between 0 and 9 months, and the infant is utterly helpless. And so complete compassion and the provision of comfort is the only job that matters, and that's really the case. And then the woman has to switch gears to some degree. The mother has to switch gears as the child starts to become more mobile, fundamentally, and more independent. She has to let go of the infant, which is a real grieving process, and she has to start to facilitate this movement towards independence. But that's a hard shift, and so partly the role of the father in that is to be an advocate for the child's independence and to comfort the mother, to let her know that that degree of security provision is no longer necessary, but also to act as an advocate for the child's outgoing desire. And so it's the Oedipal situation is not only the mother, it's also, say, the weak father, but then it's also the child. So you can imagine, because Jung believed that these negotiated agreements were relational. So, you're 6, you're in grade 1, maybe you're feeling a little ill, maybe you're not, maybe you're playing with being a little ill, and maybe you're playing with exaggerating how ill you are, and your mom comes downstairs and says, you've got a test today at school, maybe you haven't quite prepared for it, maybe you should have, and she says, but you seem to have a tummy ache, maybe you're too sick to go to school. And the kid thinks, maybe I could just stay home and, mom could tuck me in and I wouldn't have to take that test and I wouldn't have to confront the world. And he says, yeah, mom, my stomach really hurts. And away we go. And the child has made a choice. And you think, well, that's a catastrophic choice. And you think, well, children shouldn't be held accountable for choices they make at that age. It's like,
that child's soon going to be an adult that's going to make very similar decisions.
The choice has consequences, and to be held accountable for that is to recognize purely that the choice has consequences and that it is a choice. Now, you could say, well, 95% of the blame is to be put on the mother, and maybe that's an overestimate. I think it probably is. But the child could say, Mom, you don't have to worry about me. I'm going to get up and go do this. And that's choice. And that's the right choice. So these are always chicken and egg problems, obviously, but that fleshes out the complexity of the situation. If you're being enticed down a pathological road, you can accept or reject the invitation. Now, some people are better at enticing and some people enforce it more harshly. And, there's all sorts of individual variability in situations like this, but just because you're offered the bait doesn't necessarily mean that you have to take it. So, and I'm not a determinist. I do believe that people have free will, whatever that means. That's a murky subject and it gets complicated the more you look at it, but whatever. It's still a good shorthand way of describing the fact that we seem to be cursed with responsibility for our own destiny, at least to some degree.